mom
So
gets
that's
that
why.
cat.
Because, yeah.
Good.
So you've been great.
Yes.
Are you working hard?
I've written
I don't know how to explain this.
She's still.
All right, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to remind everybody is that we are using these overhead mics. So anything you say, whisper, especially these folks right here, it'll be picked up, and we got people on Zoom. So just be aware of that when you're talking. So this is our fourth quarter 59-minute meeting, our reporters forum. This is one that we do every year with our same cast of esteemed reporters from our local news media. I've got a series of questions here that we're going to go through. But first we'll start out with some introductions, and we'll start with Margaret.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you this morning. Everyone here in person, you have the burden of making sure if you laugh at my joke that I know it's landing. So I'm watching carefully. My name is Margaret Carmel. I'm the senior reporter at BoiseDev.com. I cover a lot of things like Boise City Hall, Ada County government. I'm at the legislature on a part-time basis, and I do housing and homelessness coverage as well. So sort of a whole mix of things, and I'm really happy to be here, invited again for a couple years now in a row. So thank you for having me.
I'm Scott Mcintosh. I'm the opinion editor for the Idaho Statesman. I've been with the Statesman for 4 years now. I've been in Idaho for 17 years. My wife and I were the previous owners of the Kuna Melba News in Kuna for 5 years. That's what brought us out to Idaho. Probably the best years of my career. And then before coming to the Statesman, I was the editor of the Idaho Press Tribune, where I did a lot of great hiring of reporters, including Margaret Carmel, best hires. And thank you again for the invite.
All right, George, go ahead.
I'm George Prentice, and I host Morning Edition on Boise State Public Radio, and on about 27 stations now, stretching up to Bosco, over to Wyoming, Eastern Oregon, Northern Nevada. And I get to talk with really interesting people for a living. It's a ridiculous time to get up in the morning, but it is still the best gig, at least in broadcasting. So, and I get a chance to cover many of the same beats, obviously, that Margaret and Scott have and continue to cover. And these are very, very interesting times to be in Boise in particular.
Okay, hold on. I got a technical issue already. Can folks on Zoom hear me? Because I just got a question that says that they can only hear George. So if somebody could pop in the chat or the Q&A and say that they can hear me. No, because these are supposed to pick up, and then when we use the mics, it's like a reverb. So because it's coming through the speakers as well. Oh, you can hear me? Okay. Okay, well, that's good. Okay. Well, Trevor said that he can barely hear us, so I'm going to project my voice a little more towards those microphones. All right, so we'll start off with the first question here. I'll just rotate going down the line, and everybody will get a chance to answer the same question, but we'll start at different points. So the dust has settled after the municipal elections for all but 2 runoff races, which are the Eagle Mayor and the Mountain Home Mayor. First question is, what are your biggest takeaways from the local election, and were there any big surprises that you saw? Start with Margaret.
I think my biggest takeaway is that the Boise mayoral election, I think a lot of people thought it was going to be closer than it was. And I think the reason for that is it's really easy to look at people posting a lot on social media and assume people being loud on social media equals votes. And that's not necessarily the case. I think what we saw is Boise has consistently over the years been, in the last several election cycles, they've been a progressive city. They've been a pro-growth city. And I think that reflected in these election results as well. And really what it said to me was, wow, Boise really supports the zoning code rewrite. And, you know, the direction that Lauren McLean is going in. I mean, you saw those outer rings of the city, voting for Mike Masterson, but but even if you look at the precinct data, Mike didn't win those precincts by, a huge amount. A lot of them still had a pretty significant McLean base. And so I think that really was a mandate for the more progressive leaning agenda in Boise, especially in terms of the zoning code rewrite and growth and what we're seeing from people, how they want the city to grow in terms of in and up as opposed to more sprawl, which was Mike Masterson's pitch. And then as far as surprises go, I was really surprised to see how close the mayor's race was. And I'm sure we can talk about that more.
Yeah, I actually predicted that McLean would win with 55% of the vote. So I was not surprised by the result. I was surprised by the council races. I really thought that there would be one or two candidates that opposed McLean would have snuck in there, given the problems that McLean's had, the stumbles that she's had in her first term. But there were some, very vocal opponents in the council races, and so I was surprised that it was pretty much a clean sweep on the council side for McLean. So she's going into this second term with quite a good mandate, and we'll talk about that in the next question about what her challenges might be. Surprised, and I guess I wouldn't say I was surprised by the jail bond failing. I thought it would be close. I could have gone either way. I thought it was going to pass. But I was not surprised that it was that close.
Scott. And George, to you, what were your biggest takeaways from the local elections, and did you have any big surprises?
I think that everyone was a bit surprised by how robust the turnout was. And I think that most people agree now that once Boise's city council seats were divided by district, that would dial up participation. And indeed it did. It drove up voter turnout. What it didn't do was what a lot of the same people thought. They thought it was there was going to be an ideological shift, right, away from Mayor McLean, but that didn't happen. So I think that was the biggest takeaway. And then I think pretty early on, and Scott nailed it with his prediction, pretty early on, the McLean organization and the Masterson campaign, you could see what was happening. And it was basically a lack of organization in the Masterson campaign. And there was a lot of vigor and youth in the McLean campaign, and she hasn't lost an election yet. And Mike Masterson's campaign was stuck pretty early on.
Okay, building off that, and Scott alluded to it already, but I'm gonna start with Scott on this one. With McLean's win, it looks like, based on the large margin of victory, she will be difficult to unseat for as long as she decides to run. Given that, what do you see are the biggest challenges for her administration over the next 4 years?
I think her biggest challenge would be hubris. I think if she takes this victory as a clear mandate and ignores the 44% that voted for Masterson, and she continues making the same mistakes that she made in the first term, they were significant. Again, the hiring and the firing of the police chief, the hiring and the firing of the Office of Police Accountability Director, transparency issues with public records requests from reporters, and most significantly, I think, was the handling of the Steptoe and Johnston contract was a disaster, costing taxpayers $170,000 more than we all thought. And so if she goes into this second term thinking she's doing all the right things and she continues on the path that she's on, I think we're going to be in for some more serious problems continuing to do business that way and the management practices that she has. And now that she has a council that is all, on her side, if they're not a stopgap, I think that'll be her biggest challenge, is to to correct those mistakes and recognize those flaws and those faults and get those cleaned up so she doesn't make the same mistakes in the second term.
Okay, George, to you, what are the biggest challenges for the McLean administration in the next 4 years?
I don't think it will get any better for Laura McLean than this. It only goes in one direction. And I think that there will be more plates to spin, and the pace of change in the city is significant. I think if there's any hubris in her office, it would be misguided. And indeed, there were a lot of people who said, absolutely not. And it was really a vote against Lauren McLean, as opposed to for Mike Masterson. So indeed, she has to recognize that. And then, of course, there's the rollout of the zoning code, and goodness knows all of the unknowns that are going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with both of their takes. I think managing the issues that have gone on at the Boise Police Department and stabilizing that is going to be the biggest challenge, because obviously we've had more police shootings in the city of Boise this year than we've had murders. It would not surprise me if that is the only city in America that is true. And I think there's a large block of people in the city who are really looking to her to do, to address the instability there, to stop these police shooting incidents, to recruit people, and to get, to keep things stable with the new Office of Police Accountability and Ron Weiniger in there as chief. And we see it headlines all across the country. Management of police departments these days, I mean, it's really difficult because on the other political spectrum, you have other people who, and often the police departments themselves, who really are not looking for, that they might be resistant to these sorts of civilian oversight things. And so the electorate is very divided on this issue. And I think that the city hall is really going to get caught in the middle between, do we listen to the people who want to support the police union, support the police at all, with whatever they're doing, whatever they're saying, or people who on the other side who might be a lot more critical of the police and want more oversight. And walking that line between those two groups of people who are very vocal at a time when, policing issues are so difficult, officers put their lives on the line, there's a lot of emotionally charged issues around that topic. I think that's going to be a really tough one. And if they can't figure out how to right that ship in terms of, strong relationship between trust of the chief and then also figuring out that oversight piece in a way that I think makes the change that a lot of people are looking for and can find a way to stabilize some of these critical incidents that have gone on, that's going to be tough.
Margaret, you mentioned, I mentioned the runoff race in Eagle. Let's talk about that before we move on to the next subject here. Do you think that was more driven by the number of candidates in the race or dissatisfaction with the current mayor, Jason Pierce?
I think it's absolutely dissatisfaction with Pierce. And how that splits in different ways. I've talked to many people, you see it online, people are upset with the mayor over there, but they're often upset for very different reasons. The block of people who backed Stan Ridgway, they might be more liberal because he is a Democrat, but then also he's the president of the Eagle Senior Center. A lot of seniors were really dismayed to see what the city of Eagle did with ending the lease of the Eagle Senior Center, and obviously, and the mayor has his reasons for doing that. He said, hey, they were not being safe. We had financial questions. We wanted to run it. But I was at the meeting where the seniors were meeting with Mayor Pierce about that, and they were just shouting out from the crowd. It was a tense meeting, so people were upset. But then people who are backing Brad Pike, those are more, those are a totally different group of people. They're frustrated over policing issues. And so I think that it's not just number of candidates, but it's the fact that people are frustrated with the mayor over there from multiple sides.
And Scott, before you answer, the Zoom audience is saying speak up just a little bit more.
Okay. Mayor Pierce has made a lot of decisions that have upset different groups of people. And so I agree with Margaret that that vote is mostly an anti-Pierce vote. And it reminds me a lot of the Boise mayoral race from 4 years ago, where you had 4 main candidates. You had a couple of tangential candidates, but you had Mayor Beater and Lauren McLean and Rebecca Arnold and Brent Coles. And as I noted at the time, in the runoff election, Dave Beater's vote totals were virtually unchanged. There was maybe, I don't know, 100 vote difference, meaning that all those people who voted for Rebecca Arnold and Brent Coles voted for McLean in the runoff. So that suggested that was indeed an anti-Beater election. And I think you got the same thing. I think those votes that went to Stan Ridgway and Mark Delanicenti will go to Brad Pike. And so I think Pierce is probably gonna have a really tough time in that runoff. And Avamore was a big issue for a lot of people, and I think that was a big thing. But yeah, the senior center, the rec center,
Suing Home Depot.
suing Home Depot, suing a subdivision over. He just kind of made a lot of enemies in a lot of different factions.
George, you have any thoughts on the Eagle mayoral runoff?
Just the headline is just, I think, dissatisfaction overall for the status quo. I will be very interested to see what the turnout will be in this runoff.
All right, we'll move on to our next subject here. And George, we're going to start with you on this one. This year, we saw the passage of the comprehensive zoning code rewrite in Boise. And the first question related to that is, what immediate impact do you think this will have on the housing industry?
I don't think there will be a formal immediate impact because indeed it has to roll out with projects in the pipeline. That said, something really interesting happened last evening. I was listening to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting, and those are usually boilerplate meetings, where, something either, fits what the status is of the block and the neighborhood, or it doesn't. In essence, what we had last evening was a couple that owns a home on North 18th Street in the North End, about a block from Hill Road. And sitting on it currently is a 1950s era one-level home across 2 lots. And this couple said that they sat on that property, as it's currently a triplex rental, sat on that property for years until the zoning code was passed. And what they're proposing is to demolish the existing home and build 2 small homes with ADUs on them and set them back. And oddly enough, to use metal roofing, something that the Historic Commission never approves. But their argument was it's more sustainable, et cetera. Through their presentation, through the testimony from the public, and then from the members of the commission, every one of them referred to the zoning code about, okay, well, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about change. And I think that the biggest change is going to be in our conversation at how it influences some decisions of projects that currently are in the pipeline. I thought it would only impact projects that will just start at some point in 2024. But indeed, there's a lot of conversations. And ultimately, by the way, they okayed this plan. And it was rather stunning that they just agreed to demolish this home that is exactly like all of the other homes around it, to put in more sustainable micro units and split the lot and put ADUs on them. And it was almost like boilerplate from the new zoning code ordinance.
I guess I can amend my word immediate impact to short term.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of a flood of applications. It wouldn't surprise me if people have been sitting on, projects waiting for this to take effect December 1st. And we're going to see more projects probably on those transit corridors, and we're going to see more density than we have seen previously. But also, to George's point about demolishing homes, that if you're gonna demolish an existing affordable housing project, you're going to have to, or change the use of a building or a nursing home or things like that, you're going to have to go through a CUP process. So I feel like there's this sort of perception that on December 1st, we're gonna hear a fleet of bulldozers just start up and start destroying Boise. I don't think that that's really going to be the case. I think we are going to see some of those smaller projects eventually turn into larger developments. But because of one, the length of time that it takes, for people to file these permits, to go through this process, as well as these requirements that, hey, if you're going to demolish existing affordable housing or you're going to change, the use of something, that you're going to have to go through a CUP process. If you've ever guided a client through a CUP process, it is a long, it is not easy. And so I think that there are going to be less of an immediate impact to those inner neighborhoods or existing properties that a lot of people are worried about.
Yeah, I think the immediate impact is not going to be as great. Like Margaret said, I don't think there's going to be a fleet of bulldozers coming into Boise. I think there will be a number of smaller projects. People who, own a property, maybe it's their own property or they're renting it out, and rebuilding, putting a new house and an ADU doesn't really pencil out. But if you do a house and 2 ADUs or 3 ADUs, then actually it starts to pencil out and it makes more sense. And so I think you're going to see those smaller projects come online in the near term, and it'll be much easier for them to do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
One other thing that I just to build off of Scott's point that I'm going to be interested to see the impact of is this new zoning code. It really cut down on the minor land division. That is something that that enables you to have a lot and split it and easily build a new house or build a couple new houses. And there are new regulations on that minor land division because the city is trying to shunt everyone to go through a subdivision process. And so really what that turns into is time. And so, for you all as realtors, if you're selling a lot and saying, hey, you can do a minor land division real quick and put up 4 houses. Oh, hold up. If you do that, one of them has to be affordable now. That's a new requirement. And so, okay, if we're going to do 4 houses on this lot, split this up, we got to go through the subdivision process. So I'm going to be super interested specifically to key in on that. And I'm sure you all are too, to see, okay, did that create the intended effect? Did the city get affordability out of that? Or did it just make people say, nah, I'm just going to build, one giant house instead of a bunch of little ones instead. And so there's some checks and balances in the code that I think are going to slow growth and slow some of that infill development in ways that we can't really pinpoint right now because the market needs to work it out.
By the way, if I may, at that same meeting last night, the Catholic Diocese put their plan before the commission on that huge lot where Baird's dry cleaning used to be. And their plan is to build a pretty tall building, about 65 feet high. And the commission, again, started quoting from the new zoning code, and they turned it down. They deferred it and said, this is too big. This doesn't really fit in the future vision.
Thanks, George. So this question is similar to the first one, but it's looking at what's going to be the impact on housing inventory from the comprehensive zoning code rewrite in 10 to 20 years. When we look back on this effort, what type of impact is it going to have down the road, a couple decades?
I think we're going to see a lot of supply from this long term. I mean, Boise would be, I think, in a very different housing supply space if they had enacted this zoning code 10 years ago, whenever they first updated the comprehensive plan and hadn't let this process drag out. And so we're going to see a lot more supply. We're going to see a lot denser multifamily buildings on major transit corridors. To me, just the question is going to be how much infill is this actually going to produce, and particularly how much in that affordable range is it going to produce? Because the city has these, you know, requirements. Oh, if you want to build a fourplex, you need to do affordability. But for, I mean, again, you guys know this working with your clients, that might not pencil if, you know, to restrict the rent on 2 of those units or to build them with sustainable materials. And so I wonder in 10 years if we're going to have a conversation of, man, we should have gone the way of Spokane to actually get what we wanted and to up supply, because some of these requirements have curtailed exactly the kind of development we're looking for. Again, it's not really, I mean, Scott's an opinion columnist. He can commentate on what he thinks should happen. That's not really my space. That's really not like my role. But I think in terms of what the city's goals are, in terms of more development, more density, more infill, I wonder if some of these checks and balances in the code are going to be counterintuitive to what they're hoping to do.
So I think that I'm still of the philosophy that the city should get out of these affordable housing mandates. That I think it actually does the opposite. That, like Margaret just said, you know, a developer or a homeowner might say, well, gee, it doesn't pencil out, so I'm not going to build it. Whereas they might just build it if they can get market rates for it, and then you increase supply, and then you have supply outstripping demand, and then you have lower prices, and that's how you get to lower prices. But the point I want to make about the zoning code rewrite, which I haven't really written this, but I think I might. It's actually a conservative. It's a conservative policy. It's reducing regulations, it's reducing government requirements, and it is allowing the free market to respond to market conditions. And so I don't know what it's going to do, but I think that's a good thing, because I think in 20 years, I think what the zoning code rewrite does is that if there's a high demand for apartments and that pencils out for developers, there's going to be more apartments. But if there's more demand for single family houses, with ADUs, then there's going to be more single family houses with ADUs. And so I think the zoning code rewrite allows developers to do that. And the other point that I want to make is that I looked this up the other day. More than 80% of the residential property in the Bay Area, and this includes, you know, Danville and Pleasanton and Fremont, and San Jose and San Mateo, 80% of residential property is zoned exclusively for single family residential. That's why it's so expensive. They're built out. There's nowhere else place to build. And if all you can build is a new house on an existing new house, well, you're not going to get more housing stock. And so you have to go out. So now you're out in Richmond, and you're out in, you know, wherever. In San Francisco itself, 38% of all land is zoned single family residential, and nearly 2/3 of residential land is single family. So we think about, and again, I lived in San Francisco for 3 years, and we didn't want to buy a house. Well, my wife and I moved to San Francisco. We wanted to rent an apartment. And as we all know, rents are really super expensive. But that's because almost 66% of residential land in San Francisco, in the city of San Francisco, is single family. It's required. You can't build apartments. It's 66% of the residential land. And so I think the zoning code rewrite tries to get rid of that, tries to, you know, ameliorate that to some extent. So I think, you know, we talk about not wanting to become another San Francisco. Well, I think the zoning code rewrite actually is an effort that prevents us from becoming another San Francisco, where rents are super high and housing costs are super high.
George, long-term impacts of the zoning code rewrite in your view?
I think indeed there will be the tangible long-term impacts, the construction, dirt being turned, but I think that the biggest impact will still be anecdotal. It will be because of change, because of density. I think that there will be a growing conversation about identity or character of neighborhoods or lack thereof. And I think that we're about to enter a really interesting time where neighborhoods are going to be reinvented, or they're really, really going to fight hard not to be.
Thanks, George. All right, we'll shift to another yearly topic of ours, which is property taxes, and I'll start with Scott on this one. Most residents are expected to see a drop in property taxes due to various factors, including legislative action in the 2023 legislative session. Do you think the legislature will continue taking actions to decrease residential property taxes in 2024? Or will that issue be lower on the priority list now that most will see a decrease this year?
I think the legislature will wash their hands of property taxes this year. I think if anything, we might see some efforts on eliminating the exemptions for hospitals and maybe Micron and some other legislative action on that end. But I think, first of all, I think the legislation that they passed in 2023 was really bad. It was taking revenue from state coffers, income tax, corporate taxes, sales tax, and they were diverting it to local services. And so really it was a Band-Aid on the real problem that's underlying everything. And we talked about this every year. The disproportionate reliance on residential property taxes for local services because that homeowner's exemption was exempted or was capped, and residential property values have gone up. So now disproportionately to commercial and agriculture. So it's gone from 62% of the tax burden to 74% of the tax burden this year in Ada County alone, residential property taxes. And so residents where we were paying, 62% of the property tax burden, we're now bearing 3/4 of the property tax burden. Now this year, most of us will see a decrease, partly because of the legislation that was passed that diverted state revenue to local entities. And also because a lot of our homes got assessed at lower value. So combine that with a little piece of state help. Most people say, oh yeah, my taxes went down. One of the things I want to point out is that our property taxes in Idaho are still relatively low to the rest of the country. California passed Prop 13, terrible proposition, by the way, for a number of reasons that I won't go into. But they capped property tax at 1%. If you look at your tax bill, most of us are sitting around 0.5% or 0.6% of our assessed value. So we're still a long way away from crisis mode. And so I think because of that little dip and because the state did something last year, I think we're not going to hear much of it this year, even though what they really need to do is they need to index the homeowner's exemption so that we don't have these wild fluctuations and these ever-increasing growth in residential property taxes.
All right, we'll go to George next. George, just to state the question again, do you think that property tax legislation will be lower on the priority list this year now that most will see a decrease of some sort?
I don't think they will try anything new, to Scott's point. I think this year is their victory lap. Those bills that are going out this month actually have the words, I want to make sure I have this right, quote, tax relief appropriated by the legislature. It's on everyone's tax statement. So it's definitely, it's an election year, and I think it's their victory lap. And again, to Scott's point, that bill, that House bill, I think it's something like 20 pages. It's a mess of how many buckets that they had to draw from to make this happen. And the Senate tried, finally the House tried, but if you look at those 20 pages and all of the strike-throughs, it's a mess. I don't think they'll do anything remotely like it this coming year, because I think they'll just spend a lot of time just patting themselves on the back for what they did last year.
I agree with that, especially since that bill, it was a multi-year package. So while that package is still getting paid out, over the next several years, I think that's going to get set aside. Well, we'll deal with it when the relief runs out and we have to figure out how to fund property tax relief again. And in the meantime, I think they're going to get bogged down in the possibility of the hospital exemption issue, school vouchers, books in the library, all of those, possibly abortion again. I think they're really going to get really riled up on those social issues again. and the property tax as well. We did that last year, but it will come back. And it will come back, but in a couple years because of the structure of how they paid for that and how it's not forever. And we're gonna see the relief from that bill go down next year and especially in year 3. And that's when people are gonna go, hey, what the heck? Why are my taxes going back up? And that's when they're going to have to talk about it. And it wouldn't surprise me if down the line we see more, I'm gonna use the word punitive actions against local government to try to curb those property taxes, which as we saw in 2019, doesn't really have a lot of impact on your bill. But what it does is it makes it harder for Meridian to build a new fire station. And that pressure on local governments, I think, will continue.
All right, George, Margaret kind of touched on this, but we'll start with you on this question. What do you expect to be the big priorities for the legislature in 2024 beyond property tax relief?
Culture wars. It's an election year. It'll be, they'll demonize librarians. It'll be a bit of a mess, but my sense is it'll be a culture war year.
Yep. I think that that's likely what we're going to see again, especially in a presidential year. And with property taxes taken care of, that's going to be the emphasis. Pretty much what we've seen consistently out of the legislature is social issues that are making headlines on places like Fox News or other conservative outlets, conservative social media. That's what they're going to focus on because that's what their most engaged citizens are looking for. And that's, to some people, like that's great. That's what they're looking for. But to other people, that can be a distraction. Like, gosh, I don't want to talk about library books at the state capitol. I don't want to talk about these sorts of like at school athletics and transgender kids playing athletics. I want to talk about property taxes. I want to talk about Idaho can't fund its EMT services or all the those sorts of things. But often legislators are playing to who are their most engaged folks, and often those are the people that are looking at headlines on conservative outlets, and those are the issues that those people really care about. They're going to respond to that.
I think the biggest issue that we're going to see in the legislature is school vouchers. I think there's going to be a huge push to pass school vouchers, and I think it's going to come up very early in the session. I'm sure there are, I don't know, half a dozen bills already written that will be introduced on day one. And then I think those proponents are going to spend the entire session trying to pass those school voucher bills. I think other little issues, I think there's going to be a fight over Idaho Launch. That's the scholarship program for beyond high school. I think there's going to be a fight over that funding. And then I think we might see a little bit of a tiff over University of Phoenix purchase. The University of Idaho's purchase of University of Phoenix, and the legislature, I think rightly, is going to try to inject itself into that debate and say, hold on, I don't think you can do this without our approval. And so I think I think those are the things that I'm going to be looking out for.
Okay, we'll start with Margaret on this one. Let's talk about your thoughts on the 2024 housing market. What do you expect we'll see in 2024 as interest rates continue to be high and we see a pullback in new construction?
I think the way I feel about it right now is everyone is just sort of waiting. Everyone is kind of on hold. Okay, if I've got a house, I'm sticking with it because I know I can't afford a higher interest rate. But but I don't want to buy a house right now because I don't want to deal with this interest rate. So I'm going to stay in my apartment and hope my rent doesn't go up. And so I think everyone is, but because no one wants to sell, there's, the inventory is hard to find, and it just kind of feels like none of the pieces are moving around on the board. And I think we're going to see continued sort of leveling out of these prices. I don't think Boise will ever see like a huge, I don't think we're going to see a huge drop in prices, because this is always going to be a valuable place to be. This is always going to be a place people want to be. But my sense is, I think that with everything so gridlocked over these interest rates, I mean, everyone who got something is sort of like musical chairs right now, and they're like, I'm staying still, I'm staying put.
Yeah, I think the one caveat I would add to that, though, is that we're still gonna see this net in migration. We're still gonna see people moving into Boise, in the Treasure Valley. And because the locals they don't have any other option, well, I could sell my house for $800,000, but where am I gonna live? Where am I gonna move to? So they're sitting tight. And so that's gonna put upward pressure on prices. So I think that we're gonna see in 2024, even with interest rates, which, at 8.5%, we've seen that before. That's not the worst we've ever seen. And in those times where we did see 8-9%, there wasn't, a housing crash. So I think there's still gonna be buyers who are coming into Boise and Idaho. And so I think we're still gonna see an increase in, beyond inflation, 6-7% increase in housing prices.
George?
Yeah, I think it's all about the interest rates, and we know that construction has begun to slow a bit already. I will be really interested to see what is going to be happening with turnover in downtown apartments after this boom of construction, and all of these apartments just flooded the downtown area, and people snapped them up pretty quickly just as the pandemic was settling in. Now that that vibe is gone and a lot of people can't or won't work from home or those apartments anymore, it'll be interesting to see as more of those first-time leases come up and to see if there's going to be more apartment inventory, certainly downtown.
Okay, final question before we go to audience questions, and we'll start with Scott on this one. What's a topic that we didn't discuss today that will have an impact in 2024?
Well, we talked about it in everything we said, but I think growth paying for growth. And I think I bring this up every year. But again, we talk about the dilapidated schools. We talk about the inability to build a fire station, the inability to build a new jail or a jail expansion, because the tax revenues are not there for local government. And so I think that should be top of mind. How are we funding these things? And if we can't afford them, then what's wrong? Where's the rub here? So I think growth paying for growth is going to continue to be a huge issue. Again, with net in-migration next year, I think we're just going to be stuck here in the same place again next year, talking about growth not paying for growth.
George?
I'm going to cheat and give you two. One is I'll be really interested to report and read and hear more about these declining birth rates and dropping enrollments in our schools. I think that's going to be a really, really big story. And number two, we are somewhere between a rash and an epidemic of people who have been seriously injured and or killed, particularly in the city, on foot, on a bike, or what have you. And indeed, there is a task force that is about to address some of this. But I think that's a really big problem to solve, because you're going to have to get into the heads of drivers. Things are going to have to change. I think we're right on the edge of an epidemic of a lot of people being killed in pedestrian accidents.
Those are both really, really good points. For me, what I'm really watching in 2024 is amenities and how that can keep, in line with what Scott said, how that can keep up with what people are looking for. Particularly in Boise, there's constant demand for more parks, more public spaces, more affordable housing projects, more, and that is difficult to sustain, particularly with just with the cap on new construction taxes and other constrictions on these local government budgets. I mean, we're talking about there's pressure to build a new library in West Boise. That would be, guesstimating $8 to $10 million plus new staff, new startup, new costs. At the same time, we have two pools in Boise, the historic Lowell and South Pools that closed, and they have not been reopened either as a new pool or refurbished because the city didn't have the money in the parks budget yet. And, so there's a lot of tensions like that in the Boise, but particularly in the city of Boise municipal budget of, okay, like, everyone wants this new library, but everyone also wants these two pools to reopen. Everyone also wants Mergerdio Park, or at least the people who live near Mergerdio Park really want it. And how do you decide, that there's not, money doesn't just grow on trees, particularly for these 10, 12, 15, $18 million projects. And I think looking at how the city is going to have to pick and choose, and how voters are going to have to deal with the fact that the city will pick and choose, that's going to stay with us throughout the next year.
All right, so that's the end of the questions that I had. We'll start with any questions in the room. And then if you have questions on Zoom, you can go ahead and ask those in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get to you here shortly.
In regards to both traffic safety, George's point, and density, transportation is a huge part of that. And we've got really, really poor public transportation, which requires a lot of our high density projects. We have to put in a lot of parking, covered parking, which is as expensive as the residential space. So local option tax, when do you think is that just a dead horse that keeps getting beat all the time, or is there a chance?
No.
I don't know. I'm always pessimistic about it. Utah's got it. I don't know, say that to them over and over again. Utah's got it. And other cities have public transit and local option taxes. I don't know, it makes sense. I've written about it many times and advocated for it. But gosh, this legislature, I don't ever see them doing it.
I think we would have to have a major turnover in leadership at the legislature for that to even be considered. There's a lot of people at the legislature who've been there a long time, like Speaker of the House, Mike Boyle, staunchly opposed. And I think while those folks are in upper leadership, we won't see it.
George?
It makes too much sense. So no, it probably won't. No.
So my question is about transit, right? And so I think we've talked a lot about the new zoning code and transit corridors and that kind of stuff. We now have a new CEO for the Transit Authority, and Elaine was a legend at the City Council. She's got a big job ahead of her. What do you think we're going to see with an evolution of transit? And I guess a second part of the question is, are there places where it's being done well? Because my observation is that no big city or no city the size of ours is able to do a really effective transit system, public transit. So your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that whenever Elaine Clegg came in, she looked at the system as it was and said, this is not sustainable. If we're going to make change, we can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. And so what she did is she said, okay, we're going to redesign the bus system. They broke up several long-standing routes. They split it up to, there's going to be more north-south connections. There's going to be certain routes, low ridership routes, were going to be likely eliminated or moved around. And I think, and really what you saw in the response to that is people whose service was cut off, they're frustrated. They're saying, hey, you took my bus away. But everyone else who's on another line that might get more accessibility or might get more frequency, they're saying, hey, this isn't bad. I mean, take a look at the new redesigned bus network, I think that's going to make a lot more sense, because the way it is right now, if you want to get on the bus, everything connects through downtown or the mall. So there's not a lot of good ways to go north and south. So like a good example is last year I didn't have a car for 3 months, and neither my significant other doesn't drive. And so if I wanted to get to his house over by the mall, I had to get on the bus on the central bench. I had to ride downtown east, and then I had to get on another bus and ride back west on Fairview. And I mean, that was a long ride. And people were having to make those transitions all the time. Or if I wanted to go up State Street, I had to go downtown and then go up State Street. But with this new bus system, there's a lot of those links north and south, and I think that might make things more palatable for people. So Elaine Clegg really, I think, said, let's do something different. As far as cities that do it well, we have other peer cities. I mean, Madison, Wisconsin has a really good network. They're a peer city of ours, but the state subsidizes them. They help out, they give them money. And so we are really a weird unicorn in that respect, where we're trying to run a bus system without any state assistance.
Yeah, Elaine can only do so much. It really takes money to have a robust system and density. And so I think, to your point, we're a smaller city, and so we don't have as much density as Portland or San Francisco or Washington D.C. Other cities that Salt Lake has a good public transit system, and so we're not there yet. And so whether we're in this middle ground where we just have to get the density and the money, or it's just going to die and we're going to wake up 20 years from now. So why didn't we ever do a good public transit system? I don't know. It does require money, and if the state's not going to provide funding for public transit, then they should at least give us a local option tax to allow us to do it ourselves. But as we said, neither one of those is in the offing. So.
George, go ahead if you have any thoughts on that question.
Yeah, my sense on the zoning code ordinance, I think the biggest impact of it will be on transportation, but it will take a few years, and it will be, to what Scott and Margaret's point, it will be density on those corridors that will impact and need, maybe possibly the day of 24-hour service.
So there's still no questions on Zoom. So folks on Zoom, if you have questions, go ahead and put that in the Q&A or the chat box. Are there any more questions in person here? Okay, going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, no questions on Zoom. So, well, let's see, hold on. I think I do have one. Actually, hold on, this is kind of long. Okay. Let's see, I don't know whoever wants to pick this question up, but do any of the panelists have any insight on why the bar on safe, law-abiding driving is set so low in this valley? It seems that at least half of the people operating vehicles on the road have a small interest in even pretending to be concerned about abiding traffic laws. And those tasked with enforcing those laws don't seem to be any more concerned than anyone else. So, does anybody want to talk about that? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think that there's a couple of things here. I mean, this is a nationwide issue. I just did a story where I looked at data and said, what are some of our most dangerous intersections for pedestrians in Ada County? And when I was doing research on that, I mean, we're in a nationwide, it's not just Ada County where we're having more pedestrian deaths than ever. It's nationwide. More people are getting hit and killed by cars than we've ever seen before. And research says that that's based on a couple of factors. One, it's cars are getting bigger, and if you get hit by a bigger car, you're more likely to be hurt. But also, people are driving more recklessly because they got used to driving more recklessly on emptier roads during COVID. And also, our suburbs that are very car centric now have a lot more people in them after the pandemic, and specifically here when people were leaving California and they wanted to leave those COVID mandates behind, and they also wanted to leave traffic behind. And so they're driving around our streets like, woohoo, no traffic. And that's what we're seeing, and it's creating dangerous environments. And so I think it's gotta have to be a culture change, but it's also about how we design our infrastructure. I think we've all felt it, where you turn onto a narrow road, with a bunch of cars parked on the street in the north end, you slow down because you're like, oh, this is stressful, But if you're flying down yes, Myrtle, you're not looking for pedestrians. You're trying to weave in and out of 5 lanes of traffic. And so I think part of it is, yes, we need to talk about enforcing running red lights. We need to talk about and speeding. We need to talk about not texting, but we also need to talk about what about our roads are signaling to people it's okay to go 20 miles over the speed limit. And that's something that that's bigger than just me being a good driver or a bad driver or the cop pulling me over. That's talking about what does our built environment look like.
Nothing to add to that. That is spot on.
George, do you have anything to add to that?
It's exactly right. It's getting into the heads of drivers. And if you remember, I mean, when was the last time we were in this space? Was it about 15 years ago when we had a rash of bicycle fatalities, and the city and the highway district had a campaign, and they set out new rules as far as buffer space, et cetera. But what did it reveal? That a lot of cyclists hate a lot of drivers, and a lot of drivers hate a lot of cyclists. It's really this task force, the biggest job that they'll have in front of them. God, I hope that they just don't come up with a slogan and posters. But this is going to be a really, really difficult task to get between the ears of drivers.
Go ahead.
To just not to harp on this point too much, but to go off of, George, like we saw like swift action after there was a young teenager killed in a crosswalk over by the Albertsons in the North End. He was skateboarding to go register for class at Boise High. He was hit and killed by a dump truck. And that was devastating. And after within a week of this young man getting hit and killed, they restriped the road. They cut back hedges that prevent visibility. And you walk or bike through there now, and it feels a lot. It feels like you need to slow down. Like they said, this is dangerous, and this is really terrifying to admit. But I was actually driving through there a couple days after the crash, and I was driving my car. I had someone in the car, we were talking, and I said, wait a minute, I think this is where the kid was killed. And then I blew through that crosswalk. Not because I'm a bad driver or I was on my phone, but because it's a mid-block crosswalk that you don't expect to be there. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. There were no pedestrians. I didn't kill anybody. So don't tell anybody I killed anybody. But it was that moment I had to pull over and go, oh my gosh, I know exactly how that crash happened. It wasn't, and that was before they had restriped it and they had redone it. And I drove through there after they did it. I said, wow, this feels completely different. And so I think the attitude with this new task force, I think the attitude is going to be, let's not just put out don't text and drive. Like, let's think about what we can do to physically make people more safe.
We got time for one more question.
Thank you. That's a great topic, by the way. I know that we had a meeting with the mayor of Meridian at our office at one point, and the same subject came up. And it seems like there was really not a concrete or concise answer to address that. Driving as a citizen, I noticed that, of course, the behavior of drivers, how desperate they are just tailgating you. And, I've been living here for over 27 years. So traffic back then is very different than it is now. So to me, it just seems like there's a disconnect between, let's say, who's going to enforce drivers that just feel like they can do whatever they want here. It just seems like there's a disconnect between, let's say, law enforcement, police, just being in this major, I see police patrols in areas where they shouldn't be, where they need to be either on the highway or on major roads like on Eagle Road. It seems like there's a disconnect. So I say all of that to say this, in this kind of meetings, it would be nice to just hear the voice of, I don't know, maybe the mayor of the city of Boise or Meridian or the police chief, just to see what are they doing to address this? What is their daily focus in pedestrian safety, in driver safety, so on and so forth. We're talking about it, but it's just like, okay, there's a disconnection. It'd be nice to hear from them. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you for that. 9:59, we're at 59 minutes, but if you have a short question.
Yeah, I just want the relationship between our Ada County Highway District and all the municipalities is unique. Do you see any of that changing at all in any future elections, or, because that's a big issue when we're talking about traffic safety. Sometimes it's just painting narrower lanes and bike paths. On George's show this morning, they had in Denver talking about electric bikes and how many bikes there are now, and more so. So the highway district seems like a little troublesome. Do you see any relationship improvement there?
Well, I think it's gotten better. I think.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot better actually with the city of Boise.
Yeah,
Good to
in
know.
particular.
In terms of that changing, I get this question all the time, how do we get rid of ACHD? And I'm actually working on a little You Asked article to answer that question because I get so many emails about it. Really, in order for that to happen, you would have to have a core group of citizens come together and have a coherent message and advocate for it, like something akin to what we saw with the ballot initiatives against the library and the stadium projects 4 years ago. And I think there's a lot of people who are grumbling about ACHD maybe, but in terms of actually knitting together a group of people who can row in the same direction and launch a campaign to get the signatures that they need, or to, really like pull the trigger on that happening. I think that is the harder challenge of actually herding the political cats to do that. I can't speak to the specifics of exactly the mechanics of how to get rid of it because I think I know, but I don't want to give you some misinformation here. But I think that's the challenge, is getting people to actually activate on that issue and do some political organizing that's meaningful.
All right, with that, we're gonna wrap up. We're a little past 59 minutes. So I want to thank Margaret, Scott, and George as our guest speakers today. And I want to thank everybody for attending on in person and on Zoom. This will be our final 59-minute meeting of the year. We'll probably start back up in March of next year. So thanks again for coming, and we'll see everybody in 2024.
Have a safe holiday.
See you, George.
Bye-bye, and thank you.
The more interesting question.
So you go to all of them?
No.
You went to all of them?
No. No, well, I did when I was president. I didn't run it. I don't, that was just.
How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
All right.
It was lovely here.
Same.
Scale.
Yeah, ITV.
It was.
We're watching.
She had way too many people. Real estate was fun, but she left. It was fun.
It's just my kids and her husband. And so they were, everybody was going down. There was no warning.
Exactly.
That's what happened. There was a semi that ran over and just 7 cars.
How are you?
So he came up.
How are
How
you?
was Arizona?
Was
it awesome?
Yeah, it was 75 and-
Like a 20-minute conversation with ITD. I was like, right on.
Well, we were okay.
And their
So
answer is,
what did
well, it'll
you
be
do?
over. We're
I
about
left on Thursday.
Thursday, so you were there.
I
I
went
went out
I
there.
went to
They
Knott's
had
Berry Farm.
signs.
Okay, because it really was.
Because it was about a half-mile warning, was all they were giving. And there's switch marks everywhere. And
Not
it's like,
very formal.
you gotta remember, she started
It's
taking
been a while.
just to come up, to stay off the freeway.
Honestly, it's for
Oh, yeah.
But it becomes one of those things, it's like,
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
what can I do?
That happened.
Yeah, maybe I'll give it a try again.
You know, I wanted
Tough
to
morning.
talk with Greg about
We're the only
something like this in
community in the nation
Valley
that has
County.
a multi.
because they have all the problems.
Yes.
And also just the workforce development.
Redundancy and bureaucracy.
But
We
it's
did a
happening.
deal with urban lands.
We have money.
Yeah.
And we actually, and we don't get to keep that money at the end of the year.
Thursday.
And we got more this
Oh, I didn't
year.
give, I didn't give them
And
credit.
I'm not-
We're
I'm
in
not
front of
on
our
the
only two
committee,
streets in
but
this
I-
county.
It was a
Yeah,
good
it always seems like
experience.
there's interesting stuff.
I'm
That's
not sure.
ICD.
We tried to get
Those
the
are only
leadership
two
academy
streets.
to do their
And the
project
ISAC.
that way, but ran out of time. It was a thought that was, too late, but, so we're gonna try to do that with,
I mean, Twin Falls got
stuff that they come
big,
forth
but
with, but
they had,
God, I
yeah.
we need to get the word out.
But
Oh,
what
yeah.
starts to happen
Really,
is my
that's what it
parents
is. The
are.
money's there.
Yeah.
And the community is very,
A mile off.
if you
I
get to
think
that
what I
point,
So
said
people
is
now
I can
are
tell you
buying
exactly
that
what
to
they
want.
not have to go 25
I mean, a
through
good
rules. Now
application
they're taking all
with
those
a good
country roads.
presentation with
I
a,
sit out there.
with a
and
budget
they
that's
finally
totally
put a four-way
written
stop.
out.
There were so many
But-
horrible
but
crashes
they-
because
Yeah,
it was.
I've got some
I don't wanna
clients,
stop
right,
either.
This way, people are going
Because
60 and
actually,
people would
every
run
single one of
70.
those,
years ago.
I mean, there were trucks
one
that,
of the
I mean,
applications.
my mom and dad,
Great.
we had.
They were
bought a
awesome.
house
And
over
so
there.
but we sent a few back because they didn't have,
With,
they
No,
they
they're
didn't
not.
specify
Yeah.
that the money was
Yeah.
going to very, oh, well, we want up to this,
They're driving,
but other,
You know,
heck,
spending a
up
lot
to
of hours on the road
$25,000
trying to
Yeah.
get
with
to
a,
East Boise.
what
They
they
like to
say,
live in
something.
People go faster.
That's money on there, whatever the percentage is, that's.
But yeah, I mean, it,
15.
each.
Oh, 15, all right, but still, it's not a lot.
Size
Yeah.
towns. I mean, yeah, I mean, there were.
I know that we looked at
Almost
doing
10
this a
cars
couple
deep
years
and
back,
stuff.
and it's just
Really
kind of
rough.
like.
In
well,
New
Okay,
York.
exactly, what do you wanna do?
Like-
And you're right, I just figured we'll have, I'm not on the committee anymore, however, I'm still advocating for
Yeah,
it.
well, I
It was a
appreciate
good
it.
experience,
It's a good
it
reminder.
really was. I have a
Nice
couple
looking,
of
it's in a
these, but I don't
beautiful
know.
neighborhood, they've got
Sure.
a community
We're at
pool,
the
and,
start.
you know, all these amenities are frustrating.
Here,
Thank
you
you.
could use
Yeah.
probably more than I can.
Thank you.
No, we live in-
Yeah, well, this year was really good for grants. I mean, between
I know.
the community grants that we got and the
Yes.
political stuff, because we did a $34,000 pool. We did like $95,000.
That's awesome. Now, I know PRI, I know you're doing a good job. This was like, there's different.
I've got
This
cousins
one's
in
a little
Cleveland, and we, you know, I'm
Yeah.
talking to them, and they're like, you know, they live,
This was,
you know,
for some
like
reason,
from
I
like
took
Erie
mine
in
this
a.
past year, and it was a great
Big house.
experience. So,
Gives people money to help them.
Yeah, I'll go and look at the applications. and
Yeah.
see. And that's usually where the best ideas come from,
Yep,
just looking at
yep.
those.
So if you do that in a bike instead, then, you know, that's all about it.
Exactly,
yeah,
yeah,
but the leadership academy, we want to get that started because
anyway.
I don't know what their project is gonna be, but if they come up with a good project.
Try to do something with sports that go to
we want it to be able to
Oh, yeah.
put it out there, except not just on our website and on our, it needs to get out,
Yeah.
so.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming in person today.
Yeah. Is this-
All right, well, that's fun. I really, those three
What?
journalists.
Things that we're facing, everyone else.
Well,
Yeah.
what's the problem?
They had a problem.
I will do that.
Originally, it's like we did Zoom for like
Oh,
2 years.
right.
And
Oh, I understand.
then we
Yeah,
did
you're kind of that.
I
hybrid to
understand, right.
accommodate.
You guys still get together?
So it's like
Well,
we're kind of stuck with each other rock
We
and
did
roll,
that.
because I know if we just say,
Growth going up, and, you know,
people are gonna be mad that they're
It's
on
gonna,
six.
I know, that's been one of the, I was sitting here thinking, we need to have a list of the good and the bad and the ugly that came from COVID. Because there is good, I do agree with the fact that there's some people, but this room.
I'll hold it touch base.
Well, yeah, that was when it was in person.
Yeah.
I'm not-
Exactly.
And that was,
So therefore,
so many
this is
people
one of
now
those
are
things
feeling
where,
like they're locked
so
in.
how do we
Yeah, let me
wean
know
them
right now.
off the?
So,
I mean,
I
Because
did
I'm
some
sitting there
stats.
this morning going, well, maybe I should, and then I said, no, they'll be.
Something like.
I know, well, we could just go full circuit and say.
And
They're
like, get,
outstanding
well, we
right
could
now.
try that, I just say, somehow we've got
So they're in that sort of.
I do understand time because I get it. I mean, I will say that when I was on so many committees, it was like, once
Also,
was
people
this,
like me,
once that was crazy.
I've been
So I
like-
wound up saying, well, I'm gonna have
So I
to,
got April.
you know, this one is just gonna be Zoom. I can't be running around and going to the office and then back to, then sitting in a room for Zoom. I said, that doesn't work.
Well, that covers
But-
about half
but I
of my
really,
day.
I don't know, there's something, the energy is
Sell
just.
my house.
Never really got to.
I agree.
That's
But
just
if I
my
wanted to
two
go to,
cents.
No, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I
you know,
know.
take the proceeds and.
And we talked about
buy
it in
2 or 3
policy
buses,
committee,
you know?
I'm
is
actually-
Greg wanted to have an in-person, so we brought an in-person back,
So.
but then it's like, we still have to
But
worry
then they're
about those
not
folks.
here.
I know, exactly.
But that's the thing,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, in the last
Increase
meeting,
those
I mean, the
exemptions
people from the
from
committee.
250 to 5 and then
But,
5 for a
um,
married couple.
I don't know what the answer,
I don't know what the answer
I
is.
know you don't know what the answer is, and you're right, cold turkey is probably only, but if you've got, you're bringing in great people.
Yeah.
And it's good for us to see these people and to really, and
Right.
I don't know. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
So we had a total of 30. We had,
Jim, I'm Scott. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for being
I know, well, the most we've ever had.
Let me make
But
sure I have you
that
down.
was
Been here in
Phil.
person.
the most we've ever had,
Yeah, no, it's nice to do these in
Yeah.
person.
and that was back to the guild.
So I
And
was
then the most
president
we've
here
ever
And
in
we can have,
19.
we can do
Oh,
that.
yeah, well, we had 120
I-
Here.
Right, for the,
I think
right.
every December since.
Yeah.
And then the most we ever had online was
Like I did it once and then.
Maybe,
for
I think maybe
the
that's.
CCA update, and we had 135.
Well, you were still at it in 18.
And then we did it again, and it.
Well, that's
it
true,
just keeps
but
going.
but when we were online, we had to be online.
Yeah,
And everybody was really
December
used to
5th,
that.
3:30.
I don't know, I'm just saying, it's kind of,
Remember when I had
to-
the
if
radio
I
show?
was sitting up
Yep.
there.
I'd come on as a
Like,
guest.
I'd say, why is George up there? And I'm, you know, I've taken my time.
Missed doing that.
Yeah.
well, he had an excuse.
I get it, I get that too, I mean, I get the whole thing, it's just that, and you're right, the only way to do it is to say, hey, this is in person.
We had to come up with topics, and so we ended up with all of these nonprofits.
And then if people get mad, then we're, all right, well, we'll have Zoom in.
Yeah, well, actually, no.
First thing when I was
Yeah,
in,
if
you
you,
know,
well, no, I don't mean
So
never.
every-
I mean, you have to do it more than once, because when you do something once, it's, you know, it doesn't,
They didn't know.
at least in some things, maybe
I did
this.
both of them because I was. I had to.
Yeah.
I was
I
just-
mean, it's
Sure.
kind of like when we had our
Everybody was, you know,
meetings,
when you're not in that role.
Yeah.
and people weren't there, and we were
Well,
like
let's start taking
deeply
a bunch of shit.
involved with great conversation, but it's so difficult to have those great conversations when, you know, you don't know somebody's, but, you know, because people aren't listening, when they're waiting for their turn, as opposed to being engaged in the.
Good to see you, Mr. Phil.
I don't know, I don't know.
So,
Heck, we've got this.
so your Facebook post, had a good Thanksgiving with the family.
Well, I mean, seriously, what are we filling
I will see you.
classes? Are they all?
I mean.
All right, all right.
Yeah.
I have convenience.
I'm
really quick.
just being an old person, what can I say?
Well,
Yeah.
our symposium.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
And the open house. So, like, we did have some good events this year. Yeah. I don't think
Some
we're
went,
like
some happened.
every event.
People went
like,
crazy
out
when we
of
came back from COVID on the
Yeah.
streets.
happened, but,
People
we
said,
all
"Oh,
love you."
Hi, sweetie, are you okay?
Thank you. This was great.
Are you okay?
Thanks for coming.
What do you ask?
Well, I don't know, you kind of.
It's COVID.
Okay.
Oh, good.
I don't know if there's anybody that would have pulled it up.
Yeah.
We told everybody to come
Yeah,
here.
just trying to get.
So, so
And there's a lot of them
50,
that
you know,
probably went, oh, they probably went there. and there was something
Yeah,
there.
oh, that's right, when are you flying?
Really early Thursday, I mean,
I know, I'm flying really early Thursday on Delta,
Yeah.
get in around 1 or something.
Yeah, I get noon or something like that,
Yeah.
and then Denver.
All right, and you were still on my list. We've had.
Yes,
we've had
yes,
some-
yes. I know, I originally
Yeah.
set myself up, I registered to my room the day before, because I didn't go to St. Louis.
But you're still on my list. We're gonna go to tomorrow.
Until
I'm ready.
the
And then I just
nighttime,
see if
and then when I went to the,
it's gonna be fun. I
Oh,
think you're
I'm
meeting
like,
Judy.
I didn't get in by 1. I said,
Yeah.
heck, I don't have to take an extra day.
And it, we're, it's a really cool hotel.
I know, I just
Right.
saw that, right.
Right, so.
I live